Hey guys, welcome back to another deliciously dull bedtime story. So boring, you might not even make it to the end. I'm Austin. I started making these videos because I couldn't sleep either. And honestly, nothing helped me like a good old-fashioned slow story with zero excitement. So if you're tired, restless, or just need a gentle nudge toward dreamland, you're in the right place. Let's drift off together. Tonight we slip into the flickering glow of a great hall where tapestries sway gently and firelight paints gold onto the stone floor. Platters clink, goblets slosh, and the air hums with roast goose, burnt onions, and something oddly floral drifting from the far end of the table. But don't get too distracted, because you're here to witness one of the most absurd, underreported, and hilariously delicate rituals of the medieval world. Toothpicking. Yes, toothpicks. And no, you probably wouldn't survive this dinner party. Not because of the food, although the eels might get you, but because of the etiquette. One misplaced pick, one unsanctioned cleaning flick, and your social standing could plummet faster than a boiled lock off a trencher. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you're listening from. I love seeing where these sleepy stories end up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're seated low, near the foot of the table, not quite servant, not quite guest of honor. Your stool creaks. Your robe, borrowed, smells faintly of lavender and dust. Before you, a pewter bowl glistens with something that might be stewed figs or might be beetroot surprise. But beside it, there it is, a tiny bundle wrapped in velvet, laid with almost ceremonial care. Inside, nestled like relics, 2 toothpicks. One is carved of polished yew, the other bone white and narrow, probably goose rib. Both are wrapped with a silk thread so fine it glows in the lantern light. And as your host gestures for the feast to begin, a steward passes by to whisper a reminder, no picking until after the almond tarts. This is not just a meal, this is a performance. Toothpicks here aren't just tools. They're tiny emblems of status, precision, and, believe it or not, morality. A well-used pick suggests you are refined, temperate, clean, and therefore trustworthy. A pick used too eagerly? Vulgar. A pick used before the permitted course? Scandalous. A pick shared with another? Suggestive. A pick dropped? Well, let's not even speak of it. Historians still argue whether such strict etiquette was enforced in all courts or just among the more theatrical nobility. One camp claims toothpick protocol began as a medical precaution against plague-borne mouth infections. Another believes it was entirely symbolic, a display of restraint, like refusing to sneeze loudly or blink too much in public. Either way, tonight, you're witnessing the full splendor of what one monk described as the narrow blade between civility and disgrace. And you're not alone in this scrutiny. Down the table, a knight in crimson doublet eyes you with suspicion. He saw you glance at your pick bundle. A court lady 2 seats over raises her eyebrows and subtly shifts her own picks closer, protectively. The message is clear. No one trusts a guest who hasn't been publicly briefed on picking protocol. You fold your hands politely. Wait. Nearby, a minstrel's trio strums something lilting and out of tune. Wine flows, a child throws a fig at a dog, and still, you wait. Because the candle hasn't been snuffed yet. The signal that the casual phase of the meal has ended, and the toothpick phase may begin. It's absurd. It's glorious. It's medieval etiquette at its most microscopic, and you're only just getting started. The candle flickers twice, once like a shiver, once like a wink, and then it goes out, snuffed by a servant with a curved brass spoon, gently, silently, like ending a prayer. And just like that, the room shifts. The meal hasn't finished. There are still walnuts and dried cherries to come. But those who know, the ones with painted cuffs and rings stacked on 3 fingers, are already reaching, slowly, deliberately, for their toothpicks. You watch as a noble woman 3 seats down lifts her bundle with the same care she might use to cradle a robin's egg. She does not unwrap it. Not yet. First, she bows her head, not to anyone at the table, but to the pick itself. A private nod. A tiny, silent thank you. And then, only then, does she begin to unroll the velvet. You glance down at yours. Do you bow? A steward sees you hesitate. He coughs, politely, of course, and moves on. You realize this is not a one-off gesture. This is ritual. Toothpicking, at least among the better circles of 14th century dining, was spiritualized. To clean one's mouth was to cleanse the self, to remove the debris of indulgence, the trace of gluttony, the shadow of overpleasure. In some noble houses, guests were even expected to murmur a short verse before beginning. As the splinter leaves the tooth, so may pride leave the soul. Not mandatory, but skipping it? Risky. Historians still argue whether this pre-picking prayer emerged from Christian humility practices or was simply another layer of courtly theater. One theory suggests it originated in monasteries, where monks adapted tooth cleaning as a metaphor for repentance. Another posits it came from folk superstition, the belief that leftover food between teeth tempted demons, yes, tiny morsels as tiny invitations. You take your pick and hold it up. Yours is the goosebone one, warm from the folds of the cloth. It's shockingly delicate, more quill than blade. Someone once carved a faint spiral along the length, a flourish that means nothing and everything. You put it to your lips, not yet using it, just acknowledging. Across the table, a rotund man with blue sleeves murmurs, "May your picking be discreet and your palate pure." Is he joking? Maybe, but no one laughs. Toothpick use, you see, wasn't just about doing it right. It was about not being seen doing it wrong. That meant no sudden movements, no scraping, and absolutely no eye contact during the act. To pick while staring down a rival was tantamount to public insult. One misplaced glance had once led to a duel between brothers over a roast quail and a pear skin. Your hand shakes slightly as you raise the pick. The minstrels play a gentler tune now. There's less chewing, more waiting, and then a twitch of movement beside you. A woman, younger than you, dressed in saffron, raises her pick with a smug kind of elegance. She doesn't bow. She doesn't pause. She slides the point between her teeth and tilts her chin just slightly, as if to say, "Watch this." The room goes still. Someone coughs. A single walnut drops. She freezes. A man behind her leans in and whispers, "Not kindly." She lowers the pick. She's picked too early. The almond tarts have not yet been served. You suddenly understand why a merchant's son was once fined a month's wages for unseasonable oral motions. It's not about teeth. It's about control, about knowing when to indulge and when to hold back. You lay your pick down, untouched, heart hammering in your chest. You'll wait for the tarts. The steward passes again, nodding at your restraint. Somewhere in the hall, a candle is relit, signaling the next phase of the meal. You hear a soft clink of silver. Someone hums. You survived your first trial. Barely. The almond tarts arrive like messengers of divine permission. Warm, golden, faintly sticky, their scent cuts through the meaty haze and settles across the hall like a promise. Now, you may pick. A servant places one in front of you, and you do what everyone else does. Ignore it. For now, the tart isn't the point, it's the signal. This is your moment. You reach once again for your toothpick. The goosebone feels cooler now, like it's been waiting too. You lift it with more confidence this time, and when you finally bring it to your teeth, gently, slowly, just a polite dab behind your lower incisor, you feel it. The eyes watching. Toothpicking was not meant to be private in the medieval court. It was meant to be precise, public but not performative, practical but not peasant-like. You had to strike a balance. Display awareness of etiquette without drawing attention to the mechanics of your molars. It's like juggling invisible fruit. With your face, across the room, a knight in emerald green demonstrates a technique known in some circles as the side flick. Pick held at a modest angle, hand barely moving, shoulders utterly still. He looks like a statue touching his chin, and the steward watching him nods with subtle approval. Toothpicking in the wrong posture was, in some households, a punishable offense. A noblewoman in Saxony once had her tapestry privileges revoked for elbow elevation during dental cleansing. In another case, a young courtier was assigned a month of pig herding for public tongue disclose while removing poultry skin. You, of course, keep your lips politely closed. The absurdity is not lost on you, nor on historians who still argue about how widespread these rules were. One camp believes strict toothpick etiquette only existed in highly ritualized courts like Burgundy or Castile. Others argue that these customs trickled down from elite gatherings into lesser halls, especially in regions obsessed with honor culture, that endless medieval contest of who could be the cleanest without looking like they cared. You dab again, you pause, and just as you prepare to return your pick to its bundle, a man beside you, a merchant maybe by the cut of his wool, leans in and whispers, "Gold picks were banned in Provence, you know. Too many duels." You nod, pretending this isn't the most exciting thing you've heard all night. Gold toothpicks, it turns out, were more than just flashy. They were status weapons, both literally and metaphorically. Carried in elaborate sheaths, often worn as pins or brooches, they sent a message: I am refined, I am rich, and I dare you to comment on my breath. But the problem wasn't just their sparkle, it was that people kept borrowing them and not returning them, and then suggesting maybe the pick wasn't borrowed, but gift, and then someone else claimed theft. Or seduction. Or both. Eventually, one duke had to outlaw them entirely. Gold picks were henceforth items of temptation, which feels excessive until you remember that this was a world where bread crust angles could end a friendship. You return your pick to its cloth, gently. You even fold the velvet once, a gesture you saw the noblewoman do earlier. She notices and gives you the faintest nod. Recognition. You don't dare smile back. Instead, you reach for the tart. It's cooled slightly. Perfect. You take a bite and try not to think about the next course or whether anyone will judge you for picking again. They will. They always do. A breeze drifts in from the high windows, carrying the scent of wax and something herbal. You recognize it now, rosemary, not from the food, from the rinse bowl. In some places, nobles dab their toothpicks in rosemary water before use as a sign of purity, or, depending on the region, rosemary meant intention. That is to say, I meant to speak, but instead I cleaned. Symbolism was layered here, and dangerous. You sit back. You've passed through the second fire. The hall glows warm. The music resumes. Somewhere behind you a servant spills something. No one reacts. All eyes remain suddenly on the picks. You're one of them now. The almond tart is gone. Not a crumb remains on your pewter plate, not even a sticky smear. And now you know what happens next. Or you think you do. You reach again for your goosebone pick, fingers poised with confidence. The air is still warm, heavy with wood smoke and roasted walnut. You lift the tool, but just before it reaches your lips, a hand. The steward steps in, silent as a breeze, and gently taps your shoulder with a slender silver rod. Not a word is spoken, but the message rings loud. Not yet. You pause, set the pick down. See, you forgot one rule, possibly the most frustrating of them all, the third course rule. Toothpicking in polite society wasn't permitted until the third course had ended, even if the tart had passed, even if others had begun, unless you were of the highest rank or had received what was known as the green glance from the host. You were expected to wait until exactly the midpoint of the feast, and not a moment before. A subtle hierarchy of teeth. The woman across from you, yes, the one in the saffron robe who picked early, she has disappeared. You don't know where. Her goblet still sits untouched. But her stool is empty, possibly removed for her boldness, possibly removed because she knew she'd be removed. A kind of performance protest. You're not sure. Historians still debate the significance of this third course threshold. One theory suggests it reflected the sacred trinity, with the toothpick as the symbolic cleansing spirit. Others argue it was a matter of digestion, the idea that waiting allowed the body to settle before introducing wood or bone near sensitive gums. And some think it was just about drama. The longer you wait, the more refined you seem. Meanwhile, the third course continues. A platter of dried dates and sugared plums passes your way. You take one of each and try not to think about the sliver of venison clinging to your back molar. That sliver taunts you, so close, yet forbidden. Around you, others fidget. Not everyone has your restraint. A portly man 2 stools down. He's already dabbed at his gums twice with the corner of his napkin. It's not against the rules exactly, but it's frowned upon, like whispering in chapel or humming during a eulogy. You look down the table. There at the far end, a small group of elegantly dressed elders. One of them, a woman with silver rings and a velvet head wrap, holds her pick with the ease of someone born to it. She flicks, pauses, and flicks again. Her pick is long and curved, almost claw-like. Her form, impeccable. No movement from the shoulder, just a dance of fingers and breath. You want to learn that, and so you study. The proper angle of the wrist, the half-lowered eyelids, the slight inhale before the act, like a sigh before prayer. A boy at the service table knocks over a jug. No one reacts, not even her, because to react would be to interrupt the ritual. And here's the absurd truth. Some people weren't just judged on how they picked, but on how long they waited to do so. There was a belief, half joke, half rule, that waiting until the fourth course was a sign of superior breeding, that true refinement meant enduring discomfort for the sake of dignity, which is ridiculous and entirely believable. One French noble reportedly waited an entire feast, 6 courses, before making a single pick. His name was entered in a family codex with the title Jean the Patient. Jean's brother, meanwhile, was known as the Picker of Brie after he broke etiquette and flossed immediately following a soft cheese course. He was not invited back. You shift in your seat. The third course trays are being cleared. 1, 2, 3 servants pass with stacked bowls. You catch the steward's eye. He nods. The moment is here. You reach for your pick. This time, no hesitation. You lift it, press it gently to the side of your mouth, and finally, clean. It feels like fireworks, like absolution, like freedom. A noble to your right murmurs something that sounds like approval. Someone else offers a subtle nod, and for a brief, delicious second, you feel weightless. Then you stop. Replace the pick. Fold the velvet. A single act, perfectly timed. You belong. Now that you've earned your first proper pick, you breathe a little easier. The pressure eases, not gone, but softened like wax in sun. The hall, too, seems to settle. Chatter rises just a touch. A juggler in the corner is finally allowed to begin. He tosses 3 apples and a small pewter cup. No one claps, but no one stops him either. You glance up. The king, or possibly just a well-fed duke, sits under a carved wooden canopy, inspecting his own pick, which appears to be made of coral. Not red coral, but pale, almost ivory-like. You can just make out the flash of a gold inlay. A gift, no doubt, possibly diplomatic, possibly romantic. In this world, both could be deadly. You now understand why you weren't supposed to use your pick before the third course, because here, under the frescoed ceiling and hanging herb bundles, toothpicking is visibility. The moment your hand moves to your mouth, you've entered the realm of attention. And in the realm of attention, mistakes echo, especially if the king is watching. Or worse, if he isn't, because if he's not watching, someone else is. Toothpicking wasn't just a hygiene gesture, it was political theater. And like all theater, timing was everything. If the king picked before the bishop, social earthquake. If the queen's sister picked during the steward's toast, banquet scandal. If a guest picked while the host was still chewing, that was considered symbolic abandonment. One tale tells of a German noble who picked too early at a Hungarian wedding. His host interpreted it as a declaration of boredom, which escalated to a duel, which escalated to an embargo. Trade routes were closed, marriages were cancelled, and over what? A goose feather and a bit of spinach. You take a long sip of watered wine. It tastes faintly of rosemary and regret. Now, a new tray is making the rounds. Dried orange peel, crushed mint, small cubes of quince paste. The cleansing course. These are the flavors designed to wipe the meal away, both from the mouth and the memory. It's also the time when those with unresolved bites, both literal and metaphorical, sneak in one last pick. That's when it happens. To your left, the young man in the velvet doublet. He reaches for his pick. It's simple. Bone, probably boar, unadorned. But instead of lifting it discreetly, he raises it like a dagger. Elbow out, flicks it, then sets it down beside his plate. No cloth, no bow, no reverence. Gasps don't echo exactly, they just appear like mist. One woman actually drops her spoon. A steward coughs violently into his sleeve. A nearby dog slinks under the table. The man, who clearly meant this, leans back and shrugs. In that gesture is rebellion. And that too is part of the absurd etiquette of medieval toothpick use. The pick wasn't just a tool, it was a statement. Used well, it whispered, "I understand this world." Used poorly, it screamed, "I reject it." Historians still argue over whether such public flouting of etiquette was a deliberate social strategy. Some claim nobles used toothpicking to signal allegiance, cleaning in sync with a faction leader. Others suggest it was performative iconoclasm, a way for bored younger sons to show they couldn't care less about cutlery choreography. But one thing's clear, in the medieval dining arena, how you cleaned your teeth was never just about your teeth. It was about who you were and who you weren't. You dab your lips, adjust your seat, pretend not to notice the scandalous picker, because in this world, restraint is the loudest kind of grace. You'd think, after that dramatic display, the meal might tense up again, return to its tightly wound formality. But no. Something unexpected happens. The hall relaxes, not all at once and not visibly, but you feel it in the loosened shoulders, the shift in posture, the slight uptick in table chatter, as if the rebel's pick was a pressure valve, letting out the steam of silent judgment. For a moment, everyone's more human. Until the theft. It begins with a bump. A subtle one, the kind of movement that, under normal circumstances, might be dismissed as clumsiness or indigestion. A man in russet leans forward to sip from his goblet, and when he leans back, the silver-handled toothpick that had been sitting beside his napkin is gone. You see it. So does the steward. But the man does not yet. Toothpick theft, you learn, was a known crime in the etiquette chronicles of several courts, especially when the pick in question was made of precious metal, ivory, or carried a family crest. Losing one wasn't just awkward, it was reputation-shattering. Accusations could spiral into legal complaints, social exile, even imprisonment. One record from a Venetian household describes a servant flogged for misplacing a toothpick carved from narwhal tusk. Historians still argue whether it was actual narwhal or simply carved whale, sold at narwhal prices. Back at your table, the steward doesn't speak. He simply approaches the man in russet, leans slightly, and whispers something that chills the air, like winter creeping beneath a door. The man stiffens, eyes narrow. Then, a slow, theatrical pivot. To the woman beside him. She's middle-aged, gracefully dressed, wearing a brooch shaped like a pear, and suddenly she's holding a pick, a silver-handled pick. The room stops. No one says the word, but everyone thinks it. Pickpocket. Now here's where it gets even stranger, because this moment, it doesn't devolve into shouting, or pointing, or gasping. No, this is toothpick etiquette, and it has rules. The man reaches into his cloak, produces a second pick, identical to the one stolen, holds it up. Miles, a trap. She returns the stolen pick silently, no apology, no panic, just a nod, as if to say, "Well played." Because, you see, there was a tradition, especially among nobles bored by long feasts, of picking games. Small acts of etiquette sabotage designed to test awareness, cleverness, and restraint. The most elegant guests could retrieve a stolen pick without anyone noticing. The most daring ones could plant a pick on someone else without being caught. These games weren't official, but they were understood, and they were dangerous. Get caught? You might be asked to leave the feast. Repeated offenses? Social purgatory. But if you succeeded, if you won the unspoken duel, you gained prestige. Discreet, invisible prestige. The kind that made someone not say your name, but nod slightly when it was whispered. You wonder how many picks have changed hands tonight. How many are decoys? How many were planted as gifts or traps or riddles? You look at your own pick. Plain, simple, safe. But for the first time it feels like something more. Like a piece on a board. Like a token in a game you hadn't realized you were playing. You pick it up, turn it once between your fingers, just enough to feel the weight of the moment. Somewhere nearby, a monk mutters a verse about humility and dental clarity. You suspect he's lost 2 picks already. The feast rolls on, and you, dear sleeper, are deep in the absurd theater of medieval oral etiquette, where a stolen sliver of bone can matter more than a spilled goblet of wine. The music changes. You barely notice at first, just a shift in rhythm, a different thrum to the lute, but it matches the mood. You're deep in the heart of the feast now, where tension fades and alliances shift, where the truly skilled move quietly, and the truly dangerous move with a smile. The roasted meats are gone, the sweet courses are slowing. What remains are only the rituals, slow chews, quiet sips, and, of course, the final picks. That's when you hear it. A sharp crack, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. A toothpick has snapped. Your head turns before your decorum can catch up. You see him immediately. The old man with the velvet gloves. One gloved hand is up, still holding the splintered end. The other rests flat on the table. His expression is unreadable, but the people around him freeze. He broke it, and not just any pick, his own. You would think a snapped pick is merely an accident, a slip of hand, but in medieval etiquette, a broken pick could mean many things. A signal, a statement, even a threat. Some historians believe broken toothpicks were used to end conversations without words. Others claim it was an unspoken challenge, an etiquette duel invitation, usually settled by reciting competing poetic verses or referencing obscure table customs until one person faltered. This man apparently has just issued one. Across the table, a younger man in a fur-trimmed collar stiffens, doesn't move, doesn't speak, just places his pick, metal with an amber bead, gently on the table. Then he pushes it forward, precisely 2 finger lengths, a gesture of refusal or surrender. It depends who you ask. You, meanwhile, try to keep chewing. Quietly, you don't want to get pulled into this. No one does. Toothpick duels weren't common, but when they happened, they tended to escalate. Not with swords or shouting, but with stanzas. There's a record from Flanders of 2 minor lords who battled for hours over an interrupted pick, quoting increasingly obscure texts. One recited from a laundry inventory, the other responded with a comparison to the arrangement of parsley sprigs at Lent. The winner was decided when the steward fell asleep from boredom. You finish your last bite of quince, set your fork down. Across the room, 2 women are watching each other like hawks. One just adjusted her pick, the other mirrored it. There's something going on there too, but you don't know what. The man in velvet removes the broken pick from the table, gently. He tucks the pieces into a pouch at his belt like bone relics. The other man, the one who refused, sips his wine, slow and measured. And just like that, the tension dissolves. A peace offering is delivered in the form of candied almonds. You nibble one, grateful to be anonymous. The absurd etiquette of medieval toothpicks isn't just about timing or tools, it's about reading the room and surviving it. Because here's the thing, these picks aren't just picks, they're clues, they're weapons, they're confession. A man who picks too often is seen as vain. One who never picks, secretive. One who lends his pick, too familiar. One who borrows, too bold. In some places, toothpicks were considered intimate property, closer to a comb or a love letter than a utensil. To ask for one was to expose your need. To offer one was to offer trust, or temptation. There's a record of a lady in waiting who carved her pick into the shape of a lily and gave it to a page. He wore it around his neck for 3 days before the bishop noticed. Both were reassigned to opposite provinces. Neither ever married. You glance down at your pick again. The spiral engraving catches the candlelight. It was always just decoration. Now you wonder if it's a message. You tuck it into its cloth, fold once, and exhale. You've survived another round. The pick rests in your lap, folded away again, and you feel a little wiser, maybe a little smug, just a little. But then, a pouch. It appears beside you, sat on the edge of the table by a servant who never makes eye contact. Small, woven, laced in green thread. You glance around. No one else seems to have noticed. No one else received one. And yet, there it sits. You hesitate. Reach, untie the knot. Inside, a toothpick, not yours. This one is darker, heavier. It gleams faintly in the candlelight. Not wood, not bone. It's iron, maybe? No, it's horn, black and curved, like a talon. The handle is bound with twine, stiff and unfamiliar. A small etching is carved into one side, a line, a crescent, and what looks like a tiny eye. You blink. You've just been given a signal. Toothpicks, especially in noble courts, were more than personal items. They were messengers, passed quietly between sleeves, tucked into wine goblets, slipped into bread rolls. A gifted pick could carry anything, a secret, an invitation, a warning. But interpretation was everything, and in this moment, with this pouch and this symbol, you're now a player in someone else's story. You glance to your right. The woman in saffron has returned. She meets your gaze, just once, then looks away. There it is, the opening move. Historians still argue about the purpose of pouches in medieval feasts. Some suggest they were used to protect expensive picks from moisture or misplacement. Others argue they were deliberately theatrical, turning toothpick gifting into a ceremonial act. One scholar even claimed noble households kept entire pick registers, logs of who had gifted whom and when, and whether the message had been received. You look again at the etching. Line. Crescent. Ah, what does it mean? You tuck the pick into your sleeve, careful not to drop it. Across the room, the steward gives a subtle nod. That means he knows. You don't know what you've been pulled into, but you do know the rules are different now. To carry a second pick, especially one not your own, is a bold move. It can be read as a betrayal or ambition or romantic entanglement. You've seen the warnings. One poem, scrawled in the margins of a court songbook, reads, "Who carries two carries none. He who lends one marries soon. He who borrows thrice walks alone. You're one pick in. So now what? A servant clears your plate. A dog sneezes underfoot. The lute music softens to a drone. The saffron woman is speaking to someone else now, laughing, tossing her braid, as if she didn't just upend your social peace with a horn-handled talon. But the pouch remains. And you're no longer neutral. Toothpick etiquette wasn't just about when and how. It was about what it said when someone wasn't watching. You wrap your own pick tighter, one in the cloth, one in the sleeve. Two weights on your conscience, two threads of meaning waiting to be tangled. And the night isn't even over yet. You try to focus on the next course, little pastries shaped like birds, filled with honey and pine nuts, but they taste like air. Your mind is somewhere else, heavy with the weight of a second pick tucked in your sleeve. And that's when you spot it. A wink, tiny, too fast for most, but unmistakable, from a man seated 2 tables away. Teal tunic, waxed mustache, a velvet sash bearing a single embroidered eye, the same symbol etched on the pick. He lifts his cup, sips, never looks again. So now you know. This is more than flirtation, more than mischief. It's a message chain. The court has many languages. Some speak with fans, some with ribbons. But the truly clever, they speak with toothpicks. You glance at your bundle, the goose bone still wrapped, quiet and safe. Then back to your sleeve. The horn pick presses lightly against your wrist like a pulse. Across the hall, a jester flips sideways in a lazy cartwheel. Everyone claps. You don't. Because you've just realized something. You've been enlisted. Toothpicks weren't always tools. They were tokens, carriers. In certain circles, passing a pick was how nobles exchanged secrets they didn't trust to parchment. A letter could be intercepted. A pick, nobody paid attention, unless they knew. Historians still debate how much was symbol and how much was practical. One camp believes toothpick codes were simply fashion games of the idle rich. Another suggests genuine conspiracies were hidden in their exchanges. In at least 2 known cases, noblemen on trial referenced toothpicks during confessions. One claimed he'd accepted a poisoned pick from a rival. Another swore his toothpick bore hidden message in scratches. Neither survived the verdict. Back at your table, the woman in saffron is laughing again, but not with her eyes. Her gaze flicks, briefly, to your wrist, then back to her cup. You're being watched. You understand now that this pouch wasn't a gift. It was a test. Will you carry the message? Will you pass it? Or will you fold? You glance to the end of the table. The steward is moving again, slowly, with purpose. Behind him, a servant lays down 3 new napkins. One is plain, one is embroidered, one bears the crescent and eye. Your next move is being scripted, quietly, elegantly, like a performance you didn't audition for, but are expected to lead. You wipe your lips. Then, when no one's looking, you slide the horn pick back into the pouch, tuck it beneath your pastry plate, and walk away. No one stops you. But now, everyone will remember you. Not for what you said, not for what you did, but for the toothpick you didn't return. You don't go far, just to the edge of the hall, near a column where the candlelight slants soft, and the air smells of lavender and spilled claret. You lean casually, pretending to examine a tapestry that depicts Saint Hubert discovering a stag in the forest. But you're not here for the art. You're here to think, and maybe to breathe. The toothpick remains hidden, tucked beneath a pastry that no one will eat. You didn't deliver it. You didn't destroy it. You placed it. An act of quiet resistance in a feast full of signals and sidelong glances. But will anyone know what that means? That's the part that gets to you. In this hall, interpretation is everything. A tilt of the wrist can mean yes, or maybe, or you've betrayed me. A delay of 10 seconds, indecision. A delay of 20, deceit. You've seen a woman reprimanded for handing a pick back with the wrong hand. And now you've made a gesture that isn't even in the playbook. Somewhere nearby, someone clears their throat. You don't turn. Instead, you remember a story you heard once about a banquet in Naples where a nobleman, unable to attend, sent his regrets in the form of a pick wrapped in black lace. It was meant to signal mourning, but the recipient took it as contempt and challenged the messenger to a duel. The messenger, incidentally, was a monk, and he won. Historians still argue whether the pick itself was the insult or whether the lace implied a scandal. One theory says the whole thing was a joke. Another claims it was deliberate sabotage, part of a tangled love triangle involving a lute teacher and an ambassador's niece. You don't know which is true, but you know this. Tonight, you've created your own fork in the story. A servant appears beside you, not your steward, not one you recognize. She's young, barefoot, with a crown of dried violets tucked into her braid. She says nothing, simply holds out a folded cloth. You open it. Inside, your own goosebone pick, returned to you, perfectly wrapped, clean. You're stunned. Someone found it, cleaned it, chose to hand it back. But more than that, they've signaled forgiveness, or maybe collusion, or maybe curiosity. Toothpick etiquette wasn't just about caution, it was about conversation. Subtle, coded, absurd conversation in a room where everyone talked without ever moving their lips. You nod once, deeply. The girl vanishes before your thank you leaves your tongue. Back at the table, the crescent eye napkin is gone. So is the man in teal. And the woman in saffron? Still there, still laughing, but now she's wearing your expression, the one that says, "What just happened?" You return to your seat. The air feels heavier, but it isn't tense. It's just rich, charged with invisible words. There's a tray of dates, a final cup of wine. The feast is nearing its close, but the game, that's just shifted into its final act. By now, you've accepted the truth. Toothpicks aren't just tools, they're currency. And some guests at this banquet, they're rich beyond belief. Across the hall near the high dais, a man in a plum-colored robe draws attention, not with his voice, but with his collection. Laid before him in a wooden case lined with velvet are no fewer than 7 picks, each one different, each one rare. One glints like polished obsidian, another is carved from ivory with a handle shaped like a falcon. There's one that looks suspiciously like polished cherry bark, but no one would dare question it. That would imply doubt. Doubt implies insult, and insult in this room is louder than shouting. The picks aren't scattered. They're arranged, deliberately, according to rules only a few people understand. That man, dear listener, is a member of a toothpick guild. Yes, they existed, mostly in larger cities, Bruges, Genoa, Toledo. Groups of etiquette masters formed secretive guilds that trained young nobles in the finer points of oral presentation, not dentistry, diplomacy. They taught the cadence of the pick, the flick of the wrist, the weight of silence. Initiation rituals involve demonstrating restraint in increasingly absurd conditions, picking while reciting poetry, resisting the urge to clean one's teeth through a 6-course herring banquet, even balancing an olive on one's upper molar without flinching. To join the guild was to earn status. To be excluded was to live with the quiet shame of mediocrity. The most elite members carried guild picks, small implements etched with spirals and signed in ink with a sigil only visible under candlelight. These weren't just symbols of skill, they were proof of passage. The man in plum, he is likely a grand cutter. You glance again at your humble goosebone pick. You wonder if he notices. He does, because suddenly he stands, picks up one of his tools, walks the length of the table, and sets it, gently, respectfully, before you. It's slim, horn-tipped, etched with a glyph you've never seen before. At the base is a single twisted hair braided into a ring. A sign, perhaps, of alliance, of memory, of something else. He nods, walks away. The entire table watches. No one breathes. Congratulations. You've just been acknowledged. But there's a catch. You now possess 2 picks, again. And the etiquette rule is clear. If you carry more than 1 pick past the dessert course, you owe a story. Not a lie, not a poem, a truth. Something whispered, something you wouldn't put in ink. The steward approaches. You may share it now, he says softly, or save it for the farewell bowl. The farewell bowl, you've heard rumors. No one talks about it directly, but it's real. A final vessel passed at the end of the night, where guests deposit their picks, their secrets, or their regrets. Sometimes it's filled with wine, sometimes with rosemary water. Once, apparently, with salted tears. You look at the new pick in your hand. You already know what you'll say. Not yet, but soon. The feast is nearly over. The flicker of candlelight has dulled to a honeyed glow, and the air carries the scent of wax, plum, and something faintly herbal. Mint or maybe lemon balm. You feel it in your bones. The final phase has begun. And with it comes the slow encroachment of the church. Not literal clergy, although there are a few robed figures in the corner watching everything with the polite neutrality of men who've seen too much wine, but the influence of ecclesiastical etiquette. Because now comes the toothpick tithe, a ritual practiced in several noble courts. The tithe involved presenting your used toothpick, carefully cleaned, reverently wrapped, to the host or household chaplain as a symbolic gesture of humility. The logic, just as the tongue sins with words, so too does the mouth with overindulgence. Cleansing the teeth, cleansing the conscience. You're not sure whether to laugh or be terrified. The steward appears once more, this time holding a shallow tray lined in blue silk. He stops at each guest. Some place their picks into the tray with solemn nods. Others whisper brief phrases, likely confessions or dedications or even petty gossip disguised as penance. Then he reaches you. You have 3 picks now. Your original goosebone, the horn-handled mystery pick, and the plum-gifted guild pick. He waits. To surrender 1, expected. 2, admirable. Or 3, that would be a statement. But what kind? Historians still argue what the tithe truly meant. Some believe it was spiritual theater, a way to perform modesty without actually changing behavior. Others suggest it was deeply rooted in folk traditions, where toothpicks symbolized the pathway between speech and thought, tools that touched both food and words, linking body and soul. In at least one Germanic household, toothpicks were burned after the tithe, their ashes scattered in the garden to protect the cabbages from slander. No, really. You consider your options, and then you do what no one expects. You place the mystery pick, the horn-handled, crescent-marked, lavender-scented anomaly, into the tray. The steward raises an eyebrow. You bow slightly and whisper, "Let that one carry my silence." A pause. Then he moves on. You keep your goosebone, of course, and the guild pick, that stays in your sleeve, for now. Across the table, the man in plum gives the faintest nod, and somewhere near the edge of the feast, the woman in saffron rises. She leaves through the side arch, head held high, veil trailing behind her like a question. She doesn't look back, but her seat is still warm. You wonder who will take it. The tithe tray is almost full now. The steward retreats toward the altar at the far wall, where he lays the picks gently into a carved wooden box. You recognize it now. It's shaped like a tiny chapel, complete with miniature steps and a bell-shaped lid. One by one, the picks disappear. One by one, the stories go with them. You clutch the 2 left in your possession, one yours, the other offered, neither clean. But then again, who is? The chapel box is closed now. The picks have been tithed. The tray is empty, and the room has grown quieter, reverent almost. Not silent, that would be too honest, but subdued, like the air before a thunderstorm that never comes. And that's when you notice something. The pattern. Guests are leaning in, some whispering, some simply placing their hands beneath the table, fingers moving subtly as if rehearsing music or spells. You see it in their eyes, the flicker of recognition, the brief glances exchanged like chess moves. They are preparing for the final phase of toothpick etiquette. Inscription. You'd heard rumors, of course, about nobles who had their picks carved with initials, crests, or even full lines of poetry. But this is something else. These aren't showpieces. These are messages. You spot one across the room. A woman holds up her pick, and the candlelight catches on an inscription just long enough for you to read it. Speak not of olives. What does that mean? A secret pact? A shared joke? A warning? Then you see another, a toothpick engraved with tiny birds perched on a vine, each one facing a different direction. Another reads simply, "I return what was borrowed." These are carved confessions, not for the table, not for the steward, for the receiver. This tradition, called etching in the few documents where it appears, was whispered about in court letters and old inventories. Some claimed it was how lovers sent forbidden messages. Others say it was used for revenge, and some believed it had religious meaning, that the carvings were prayers meant to reach the divine through the act of picking out impurity. It sounds absurd, but here, in this room, It makes perfect sense. You glance down at your goosebone pick, still plain, still yours. You think, what would you carve? A name? A symbol? Nothing. The guild pick still in your sleeve likely bears one. You haven't looked yet, you're afraid to. You remember the phrase whispered by a traveler once. The deepest cuts are made with wood, not steel. You thought he meant betrayal. Maybe he meant truth. A young man across from you suddenly stands. He doesn't speak, he doesn't bow, he simply lays his pick down, sketched with something you can't read, and walks away. No one stops him. In fact, no one looks at him at all. Because here's the real rule no one tells you. What is etched is accepted, and once it's seen, it's yours. You slowly unwrap your pick, still clean, still unmarked. But maybe not for long. The steward passes again, this time with a tray of fine point blades and a tiny dish of ash ink. It's voluntary, but few refuse. When he reaches you, he pauses, offers the tray. You don't move at first, but then you take the blade, not to speak, not to explain, just to mark. And as the blade touches bone, you feel the absurdity of it all peel away, leaving something unexpectedly sharp. This isn't etiquette anymore. It's memory. The etching is done. You don't rush, you don't shake. You carve slowly, carefully, like threading a thought through fog. Just 3 marks, simple, not even a word, but enough to say, this happened, I was here. You don't show it to anyone. You don't need to. Instead, you wrap the pick once in the velvet and tuck it back into your sleeve, alongside the guild pick. 2 slivers of status, mystery, and just in time, because now comes the closing rite, the farewell ball. It arrives quietly, almost modestly, cradled in the arms of a servant wearing a tunic so plain it's practically invisible. The bowl is wide and shallow, carved from dark wood and stained with age. Inside, not water or wine, but lavender smoke. You feel it before you see it. The warmth, the scent, the hush that rolls across the table like a change in weather. Each guest will approach it in turn. Some will drop their toothpicks in, others will whisper over it. A few, those who've made it this far without scandal, may be invited to drink from it, not for hydration, for symbolism, to seal the night. You rise when it's your turn. The hall doesn't stop, but it shifts, a slight ripple, like everyone pretending not to look. You approach the bowl. The smoke curls upward, soft and spiraling. It smells of rosemary and violets, and something deeper, maybe clove, maybe memory. There are already a few picks inside, lying at strange angles like fallen timbers in a forest. You remove your goosebone, unwrap it, pause, and then you speak. Just 2 words, quiet, private. Then you drop it in. But the guild pick? Because some stories aren't finished, not yet. You bow slightly, return to your seat. The servant nods. No praise, no reprimand, just acknowledgement. The final pick is dropped by a child, barely 12, dressed in green. Her pick is made of pear wood. She giggles as she lets it go. The bowl is lifted. The smoke fades. The feast is done, but the legacy, it lingers. One noble removes her gloves. Another begins plucking fig seeds from her teeth with her nails. a clear statement that etiquette has ended. The hall fills again with noise, laughter, movement. But not you. You stay seated, still, listening to the hum beneath it all, because you understand now. The absurd etiquette of medieval toothpick use was never really about teeth. It was about meaning, about manners as performance, about language without letters, a way to say I see you, or I challenge you, or I forgive you, all with a flick of bone. You feel the gilt pick in your sleeve. Its weight is real, though is what it represents. And just before the hall empties for good, the steward passes you one last time. He says nothing, but he leaves behind a folded scrap of parchment. Inside, a drawing, 3 carved lines, a spiral, a crescent moon, and beneath it, written in ink that gleams faintly silver, your next invitation will arrive by candle. You smile. You don't know what that means, but you will. The guests drift like fog now, some laughing too loudly, some whispering too softly, all of them changed. Their picks are gone, their secrets spilled or tucked away, and the rules have slipped back into the shadows where they came from. You remain. A few others linger too, people who know that the end of a feast is sometimes where the real story begins. One man rolls his empty goblet between his palms. A woman adjusts a ribbon in her hair, the exact color of her tithed pick. A steward extinguishes the last candle, not with haste, but with honor. You glance around. The plates have been cleared. The jester is asleep under the table. The minstrels are tuning their instruments, not for performance, but for memory. A soft, off-key hum echoes somewhere behind the tapestries. You reach for your sleeve. The gilt pick is still there, the only one you kept. You unwrap it, slowly, carefully. Its etching catches the last of the light. A line, a curve, and something that might be a question mark or a map. You wonder for a moment what you'll do with it. You could hide it, bury it, pass it on, or maybe, someday, return it. Toothpicks in the medieval world were never just about the act. They were about the after, about what they left behind. They lingered in gardens as buried charms, in pockets as quiet love letters, in chapels as confessions waiting for forgiveness. Historians still argue about whether any of this truly mattered. Some say these rules were invented by bored courtiers and overzealous monks. Others say they were all performance, gestures without consequence. But a few, a very few, insist the picks were sacred, not because of what they cleaned, but because of what they carried. Intent, affection, danger. You press the pick to your lips, not to use it, just to feel it. One last ritual. Then, with the slow certainty of someone who's made a decision, you place it back in the cloth. No smoke, no steward, no tithe. Just a final act of keeping. You rise from the table. Your seat remains warm, but it will cool soon. Another guest will take your place. Another story will unfold. Another pick will flicker between fingers like a whispered dare. But you step into the night. The stars are bright. The moon is low. Somewhere in the distance a breeze carries the scent of rosemary and burnt almond. And as the hall disappears behind you, you know the rules. You've lived them. You've broken them. And when the next candle arrives, you'll be ready. And now, as the picks are all put away and the candles have guttered low, you can rest. Let the strange, gentle absurdity of it all drift like smoke through your thoughts. The whispered glances, the coded gestures, the carved lines of silent meaning. They don't ask for logic, they never did. You're allowed to smile at how elaborate it all was, how utterly unnecessary. And yet, somehow, it mattered. Just enough. The same way your blanket now matters. The same way the fan hums beside you like a lute in another room. The same way your own breath moves in and out, slow, quiet, steady. Imagine the soft weight of velvet in your hands. A polished toothpick resting inside, still warm from your palm. There's no need to use it. Not tonight. You've done your part. So, rest, dear listener. Let your limbs go heavy, your thoughts go soft. You're no longer at the table, you're in your own space, wrapped in quiet. And if in your dreams you find yourself at another feast, surrounded by faces you almost recognize, with flickering lights and smells of plum and smoke, you smile out and pick wisely, because even in dreams, etiquette counts.